Tonight we gather the quiet things that outlast applause, a shoulder line that steadies the room, a camera's sly tilt before the scream, a bass note that blooms under memory, a lyric that tells the truth without shouting a catchphrase that turns hurt into hope. Giorgio Armani showed how restraint can speak in full voice. Scott Spiegel taught fear to grin and audiences to lean forward. Chris Jasper made keyboards glow like streetlights after rain. Troy Seals wrote feelings ordinary people couldn't say aloud and set them traveling on steel strings. And Rolling Ray, fierce and funny, proved that style can be survival, and a single word can build a crowd around you. We won't race the news. We'll walk room by room, pausing where each life still resounds, the whisper of wool, the creak before the scare, the hum of a Rhodes, the ache of a chorus, and the grin behind purr. Giorgio Armani stands at the crossroads of cinema business and craft an architect of quiet luxury, whose soft shoulders and neutral palettes taught the world that understatement can be power. In the mid-1970s, he launched his eponymous house, and 5 years later, dressed Richard Gere in American Gigolo, a turning point that carried his relaxed tailoring from Milan salons to global pop culture. For half a century, he kept building ready-to-wear couture hotels, even homewares. Yet the brand remained famously independent, with Armani as sole shareholder and hands-on steward. On September 4th, 2025, the Armani Group announced his death at 91, noting how he worked to the end, and how the company would protect what he built. Tributes from across fashion and film describe not just a designer, but a standard, a way of dressing that lets people breathe, move, and carry themselves with calm authority. This portrait begins where his influence is most visible, on the red carpet and on screen, but widens to the values beneath it: discipline, discretion, and an almost cinematic sense of silhouette. As we revisit the moments that made his name, from the sleek blazers that rewrote menswear to the power suits that reshaped women's wardrobes, we'll keep our lens on the person behind the empire, the Milanese modernist who turned elegance into a language the world could speak. In his final decade, Armani held fast to the principles that made his name: independence, restraint, and work done quietly at the highest level. Even as many heritage houses folded into conglomerates, he kept the company private and under his personal control, putting guardrails in place so that when he was gone, the house would remain steady. In 2016, he created the Giorgio Armani Foundation to preserve the brand's autonomy. And more recently, he enacted bylaws to guide future governance, a cautious stance on acquisitions limits, on ownership changes, and only a tightly controlled path to any market listing. Leadership was prepared to flow to a small circle of family and longtime collaborators, reflecting the way he built his studio as a workshop of trust. The work never really stopped. He continued to oversee collections and long-term projects, from the ongoing life of Armani Silos, his living archive in Milan, to preparations for the house's 50-year milestone. His health, however, was fragile enough that he recently missed Milan Men's Fashion Week. When the company announced his passing at 91, it pledged to protect what he built, echoing how he had run the brand: patient, debt averse, and allergic to noise. Cause of death was not publicly disclosed at the time of reporting. During the pandemic, when northern Italy was under siege, Armani's quiet took the form of action, personal and corporate donations to major hospitals and civil protection, and a public insistence that fashion's duty begins with care. Those gestures, like his clothes, were spare and precise, meant to do the job without spectacle. In the end, the struggle was not against a single headline, but against drift, the pressure to scale at any cost, to chase a moment instead of shaping one. Armani's answer was to leave a map and the means to follow it, so that what began in a Milan atelier could continue without him: clear lines, soft shoulders, and a house still speaking in a full, calm voice. On September 4th, 2025, the Armani Group announced that Giorgio Armani had died at 91, describing him as its creator, founder, and tireless driving force, and pledging to protect what he built. The statement emphasized the quiet continuity he prized even in farewell. Reporting that Followed filled in the scene with the restraint he preferred, Armani died at home, peacefully surrounded by loved ones, according to the obituary notice shared by his house. The company did not disclose a cause of death, a choice consistent with his lifelong preference for privacy. There had been hints that his health was fragile. In June, for the first time in 5 decades, he missed his menswear show at Milan Fashion Week, watching the live stream while recovering from an undisclosed condition, outlets noted at the time. Even then, coverage framed his absence as temporary, underscoring how closely he remained involved with the work. Within hours of the announcement, tributes arrived from fashion and film, an industry chorus recognizing the designer who dressed power into soft shoulders and made red carpets look effortless. The tone was not shock, but gratitude, a long arc completed with dignity, leaving a map for those who would carry it forward. Armani's legacy is both aesthetic and institutional. On the surface, soft shoulders, neutral palettes, and a philosophy that turned understatement into authority. His minimalist rigor reshaped menswear, helped define women's power. Dressing and rewrote the visual language of the red carpet, ignited for a mass audience when American Gigolo carried his tailoring from Milan to Hollywood. The look endured because it felt lived-in elegance that moved with the body, not against it. Beneath the surface sits the machine he engineered to protect that vision. More than a decade ago, he created the Giorgio Armani Foundation to safeguard independence, and he later codified bylaws that limit acquisitions, restrain ownership changes, and slow any IPO talk design choices translated into governance. In the near term, continuity rests with a tight circle of family and longtime collaborators, including Silvana Armani and Pantaleo Dell'Orco, alongside senior executives with the foundation as anchor. In other words, the house is built to speak in his voice calmly for years to come. The industry's response has matched the man: fewer exclamation points, more gratitude. Tributes from fashion and film hailed a designer who worked to the end, and whose company vowed to protect what he built. Farewells will be measured in silhouettes we keep wearing, and in rooms that feel steadier because of them. Scott Spiegel stood at the mischievous edge of American horror, where craft meets prank. A Detroit-area Super 8 diehard who grew up shooting with Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, he later co-wrote Evil Dead 2, the splatter comedy landmark whose delirious camera gags and kinetic editing helped define a generation of genre filmmakers. On his own, Spiegel directed the supermarket slasher Intruder, 1989, a cult favorite for its inventiveness, then steered franchise entries with From Dusk Till Dawn, 2 Texas Blood Money, 1999, and Hostel Part 3, 2011. He also co-wrote Clint Eastwood's thriller, The Rookie, 1990, and executive produced the first 2 Hostel films, cementing ties with Eli Roth, while staying close to a larger circle that included Raimi and Quentin Tarantino. Obituaries note a Hollywood legend that Spiegel helped introduce Tarantino to producer Lawrence Bender, a small spark with an outsized ripple. In front of the camera, he loved cameos turning up as a winking presence in Raimi projects for decades. Spiegel died on September 1st, 2025 at 67. The tributes that followed sounded like him, grateful, a little rowdy, and full of craft talk about the sly cut to a gag, the audacity of a POV shot, and the joy of making an audience yelp and laugh in the same breath. In his later years, Scott Spiegel occupied a very specific and beloved corner of the horror world, part craftsman, part prankster, part archivist, of a DIY spirit that ran from Detroit Super 8 weekends to studio backlots. He kept working across lanes, writing and producing, then returning to the director's chair for franchise entries like From Dusk Till Dawn, 2, Texas Blood Money, and Hostel Part 3, while also executive producing the first 2 Hostel films. What never faded was his kinetic grammar POV shots that felt like a dare, edits that turned a kill into a punchline. Colleagues would later shorthand it as a Scotty Spiegel shot, or a Scotty edit, the kind of insider compliment that doubles as a signature. Spiegel's circle stayed close. The tributes that arrived after his death painted a through line from childhood experiments with Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell to sustained collaborations with Eli Roth, with Collider, and other outlets noting how his fingerprints linger across decades of genre storytelling. Even the folklore around him, like the oft-told tale that he helped introduce Quentin Tarantino to Lawrence Bender, a meeting that helped set Reservoir Dogs in motion, speaks to a career measured not only in credits, but in connections. On screen, he kept showing up as a wink to fans' bit parts in Raimi pictures from The Quick and the Dead to Spider-Man 2, Drag Me to Hell, and even Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Off-screen, he was the guy others thanked for. A trick shot, a gag, a pep talk. The one who remembered how a supermarket slasher like Intruder could be clever as well as bloody. There's no official cause of death disclosed at the time of reporting. The tone of coverage is gratitude rather than speculation, emphasizing a body of work that taught fear to grin. The legacy he fought to keep alive wasn't prestige so much as permission to try the audacious angle to cut on a laugh, to keep the joy in the scare. News of Scott Spiegel's passing arrived this week with the tone he might have preferred, affectionate craft-focused and light-on-spectacle. Trade reports and obituaries confirm he died on September 1st, 2025 at 67. No cause of death was immediately disclosed at the time of reporting. The first public confirmation circulated through the community that raised him. Special effects legend Robert Kurtzman shared the news, and Bruce Campbell Spiegel's childhood friend and Evil Dead collaborator amplified it on X with a remembrance that ran from Sunday school to supermarket stockroom shifts to the delirious invention of Evil Dead 2. It felt less like a statement and more like a postcard from decades of inside jokes and all-nighters. As tributes multiplied, colleagues emphasized what he brought to set the daring POV angles, the Scotty sight gag, edits the permission to make. Fear grin. Sam Raimi and Eli Roth both offered warm remembrances carried in coverage. Raimi recalling Spiegel's relentless generosity and work ethic. Roth praising his genius for visual gags and even his eccentric collections. In the absence of official details, the industry's response supplied the meaning, a career measured not only in credits, but in the joy of making something outrageous together. Scott Spiegel's legacy lives wherever horror allows itself to be playful without losing its bite. He helped codify a grammar in which the camera is a co-conspirator, swooping into unlikely points of view, cutting on a gasp and landing on a grin. Evil Dead 2 turned that language into a handbook for a generation. An Intruder proved he could stage audacity on a shoestring without letting the jokes smother the scare. As a writer, director, producer, and frequent on-set accomplice, he kept the do-it-yourself spark alive, even when the budgets grew. As a friend and collaborator, he connected people and cheerled their wildest ideas until they found the light. The careers that intersect his Raimi Campbell Roth and the wider circle of genre lifers tell the story as clearly as the credits do. You can feel him in a daring POV, a sight gag edit a kill that detonates like a punchline, and in the camaraderie that makes low-budget ingenuity feel like a party. The farewells from colleagues read less like eulogies than like production notes, gratitude for the shot you weren't sure you could pull off until he said you could. If horror is at heart, a communal art of nerve and invention, Spiegel leaves it braver, funnier, and more free to try the impossible. Rolling Ray-born Juan Raymond Harper wasn't just viral, he was vernacular. The Washington, D.C. creator broke out on MTV's Catfish Trolls and went on to become a Zeus Network fixture, turning bite-sized quips into pop culture shorthand. He popularized catchphrases like purr, and you're not that girl, folding humor and defiance into the same breath, and building a following that saw style as survival. By the late 2010s, his cameos on daytime court TV and his constant stream of front-facing videos made him a singular presence, sharp, funny, and unmistakably himself, right down to the way he could turn a side eye into a full sentence. On September 3, 2025, Maryland's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner confirmed his death at 28. A cause was not disclosed. Tributes poured in across platforms and press, noting how a person who branded himself the most famous boy in a wheelchair had in fact changed the way millions speak online. The memorials felt like his content candid, a little chaotic, and fiercely affectionate, an internet chorus repeating the words he taught them until they sounded like a send-off. In a landscape that too often rewards meanness, Rolling Ray left something else behind: permission to be loud, to be stylish, to be funny in the face of hardship, and to make a single syllable say simply, "I'm here." In his final years, Rolling Ray lived very publicly at the intersection of resilience and internet spectacle. He used a wheelchair due to paralysis, and often folded that reality into his persona, branding himself the most famous boy in a wheelchair, and turning visibility into advocacy. Health setbacks, however, kept returning. In 2021, he suffered severe burns after a wig fire and documented the painful recovery for fans. In 2022, he battled COVID-19 and pneumonia with hospitalizations that he spoke about directly to his audience. By August 2024, he told followers he was back in the hospital with pneumonia and a blood infection updates that arrived not as press releases, but as front-facing videos, the medium that made him famous. Even as the health scares mounted, the work didn't entirely stop. Ray kept appearing across Zeus Network programming, including Bobby I Love You, Purr, and The Conversation, and his older clips on MTV's Catfish Trolls and Divorce Court continued to circulate, keeping his quips side-eye and catchphrases in the feed. He was widely credited with popularizing Purr, a clipped syllable of approval that migrated from his videos into the everyday slang of Gen Z and beyond. Mainstream outlets memorializing him this week cite that linguistic footprint alongside a paper trail of hospital posts, an unusual resume line, but one that captured how he worked through fear in real time. The toll wasn't only physical. Coverage over the years has noted the ableism and appropriation that shadowed his fame, the way his image and slang could be borrowed for laughs, while the person behind them absorbed the blowback. Ray responded the way he always had, by performing through it, resetting the tone with humor, and declaring presence Purr as a kind of armor. When Maryland's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner confirmed his death, reported on Sept, and 2025 outlets added what his own accounts had already taught: the cause of death was not disclosed, and the most accurate record of the struggle was the creator's own voice posted from a hospital bed, still trying to make people smile. The first confirmations of Rolling Ray's death arrived not through rumor, but through officials and the press. Maryland's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner told Entertainment Weekly that his death was reported on September 3, 2025. No cause of death was disclosed. Soon after, coverage noted that his mother had also confirmed the news to TMZ, while local Washington, D.C. outlet 7 News, WJLA, reported a statement from Zeus Network, the platform where Ray had become a fixture. National publications, including People, echoed the same restraint, his age 28, and the fact that circumstances were not being shared publicly at the time of reporting. The tone of the tributes matched the way he lived online, direct, affectionate, and steeped in the language he popularized. Friends, fans, and fellow creators reposted clips that had made him instantly recognizable: the side-eye, the clipped purr, the refusal to be small. In a news cycle that can turn grief into spectacle, the reporting remained careful, repeating only what could be verified while letting the community supply the meaning. The last hours we can speak about with certainty are those confirmed on Seepinder 3. Everything else remains with family and officials. What is public undeniably is the echo, a chorus repeating a one-syllable salute that now sounds like a farewell. Rolling Ray's legacy is linguistic, communal, and defiantly personal. He turned a one-syllable seal of approval, purr, into living shorthand for confidence, belonging, and I'm still here. That word and the cadence that carried it traveled from his front-facing videos into everyday speech memes and captions, making him one of the few creators whose voice literally changed how people talk online. Obituaries this week remember him for the catchphrases "the side-eye" and the humor that refused to flinch. But the resonance goes deeper than quotes. As a Black, disabled, openly queer internet star who made visibility part of the act, Ray widened who gets to be loud and loved for simply showing up. Coverage over the years also marked the costs, ableism mockery, and the easy appropriation of his slang without the person attached to it. He answered again and again by performing through it, insisting on style as survival, and turning pain into punchlines that built community rather than cruelty. The institutions that helped amplify him, Zeus Network, Daytime TV, the platforms that carried his clips, joined fans in tributes while national outlets recorded the facts with care and without speculation. The proper farewell, then, is probably the simplest to keep the word working. Say it when you need courage or when a friend does. A short sound, a big meaning purr, and a reminder that presence can be an art. Troy Seals was the kind of Nashville craftsman whose songs outlived the season they were written in. A guitarist turned full-time songwriter, he poured plain-spoken truth into melodies that traveled far beyond country radio, into kitchens, jukeboxes, and late-night drives. Inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1988, he amassed dozens of charting singles and multiple number ones, a resume that quietly mapped the emotional range of modern country. His catalog is a tour of American feeling. 7 Spanish Angels, Ray Charles and Willie Nelson fused gospel ache to a borderland ballad. Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes? George Jones became a generational mirror, lost in the 50s. Tonight, Ronnie Millsap rapped nostalgia in satin. If You Ever Have Forever in Mind gave Vince Gill's tenderness a timeless frame. These aren't just credits, they're fixtures in memory. Seals died on March 6, 2025 in Hendersonville, Tennessee, at 86I, passing noted by national and industry press. Obituaries emphasized his range from co-writing for legends to crossing over with Eric Clapton, while reminding readers that Seals preferred the work to the spotlight. The thread running through it all is empathy songs that carry everyday burdens lightly enough for listeners to lift them. This portrait begins with the music people still hum without thinking, and the quiet hand that placed it there. In his later years, Troy Seals stayed exactly where he'd always felt most useful in the writer's room, on the phone, in the quiet exchanges where songs take shape. Public-facing accolades had long since arrived a 1988 induction into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, but Seals remained a behind-the-scenes presence known for steady counsel and for chasing the line until it sounded lived in. Obituaries tally the scale of his career, 75+, charting singles, 10+ number ones, and cuts that leapt genres from Conway Twitty and George Jones to Ray Charles and Willie Nelson and Eric Clapton. But they also underline his temperament collaborator, first celebrity, a very distant second. Health details were kept private. When Seals died at home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, on March 6, 2025, at 86, the cause of death was undisclosed, and the funeral was private choices in keeping with a man who preferred the work to the spotlight. The initial public notices emphasized facts and discography over drama, reflecting how carefully the family managed the news. What endures from those final years isn't a single headline, but a pattern. Seals' songs kept circulating on country radio, retrospectives, and cover sets in streaming playlists because they were built for use. 7 Spanish Angels for grief and grace. Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes for reckonings with lineage. Lost in the 50s, Tonight for the warmth of memory. Even his Clapton crossover, I've Got a Rock and Roll Heart, resurfaced in pop culture decades later, proof that Seals' melodies traveled well outside Nashville city limits. If there was a struggle, it was the same one that marked his whole career, protecting simplicity in a business that rewards spectacle. The stories colleagues tell about patient rewrites, about taking the extra day to find the truer rhyme, explain why Seal's catalog keeps working. The last chapter closed with the same discretion that defined the man, but the songs remain available to anyone who needs them, open, singable, and sturdy enough to carry ordinary lives. The public facts of Troy Seal's passing are simple and spare, much like the songs he favored. He died at his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee on March 6, 2025 at 86. Major obituaries fixed the details and let the catalog do most of the talking. There was no immediate disclosure of a cause of death. Industry trades echoed the same restraint while adding one intimate note. Seal's died at home, and the funeral was private, a quiet farewell consistent with a career that kept the spotlight on the songs. Billboard's Country Update and Music Row both recorded the home setting. Music Row noted the family's choice for private services. For fans, the timeline is clear, even if the circumstances remain personal: the date, the place, and the silence around medical specifics. For colleagues, the response read like liner notes, credits, revisited co-writers, remembered standards queued up on turntables and playlists. The absence of speculation felt appropriate. Seal's had always preferred a workman's dignity to a headline, and the reporting honored that preference. What can be said with certainty is enough: the house in Hendersonville, the date in early March, and a body of work that quietly filled rooms across America long before the news arrived. The rest belongs to family and to the songs that keep carrying what he meant. Troy Seal's leaves a songwriter's legacy measured less by headlines than by usefulness, the way a melody finds work in ordinary lives. His best-known cuts don't shout, they stay. 7 Spanish Angels turns grief into a hymn you can hold. Who's gonna fill their shoes? Lets a single question carry the weight of tradition. Lost in the 50s. Tonight makes nostalgia feel like a room you can re-enter at will. What binds them is craft you don't notice until you try to sing along, conversational phrasing images that land on first listen, chord turns that feel inevitable once you've heard them. Seal's also modeled a vocation collaboration without ego. He wrote for voices larger than his own and seemed content to hear his lines return home through them. That humility is part of the afterglow. You can hear it when a bar band eases into one of his choruses, or when a radio DJ back announces a classic and the room softens. The farewell that fits is the one his songs already rehearse: simple, human, grateful. So we leave him where he always meant to be found, in the quiet spaces between the verses, in the lift of a bridge that arrives right on time, and in the company of singers who keep carrying the load with him. The stage lights go down, the lines keep working. Chris Jasper was the quiet engine behind some of the Isley brothers' most enduring records, a classically trained keyboardist, songwriter, and producer whose chord voicings and synth beds became the group's pulse in the 1970s and early 80s. Obituaries note how his playing and arranging helped drive the 3 Slowy 3 era, powering hits such as That Lady, Fight the Power, and For the Love of You, while giving the band a fuller funk-leaning sound. When the family splintered, Jasper formed Isley Jasper Isley with Ernie and Marvin Isley and stepped to the mic on Caravan of Love, a spiritual pop ballad that became their signature and later a transatlantic standard. Jasper died on February 23, 2025 at 73, 2 months after a cancer diagnosis, according to national and local obituaries and memorial notices. The tributes described him as a musical architect, more than a frontman, someone who could make a Rhodes hum like Warm Streetlight and wrap harmonies around Ronald Isley's lead to create quiet storm intimacy at stadium scale. This portrait begins where most listeners first meet him, in that suspended, weightless feeling between the drum groove and the vocal line the pocket Jasper built and protected. From the studio craft that shaped between the sheets to the communal lift of Caravan of Love, we'll trace the choices that turned a gifted pianist into a foundational author of modern R&B. In his later years, Chris Jasper kept doing what he had always done best, building rooms for singers to live in. After leaving the touring Isley lineup, he doubled down on studio work and independence, releasing music on his own Gold City Records and issuing a steady run of solo albums, 17 in all, rooted in the same classical rigor and gospel warmth that had powered the Isley 3+3 era. He likes songs with a purpose. Even his late 80s solo, hit Superbad, was framed as an education anthem, a reminder that musical uplift could carry a practical charge. The through line of the tributes is consistency arrangements that breathe voicings that cradle a melody and lyrics aimed at the better angels of R&B. He also embraced the long view on legacy. Press obituaries noted how he kept curating and re-recording material greatest hits, packages, covers, projects, and collaborations, so new listeners could enter the catalog through multiple doors. Honors arrived late, but meaningfully induction with the Isleys into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and much later recognition from the Songwriters Hall of Fame for the pen behind the piano. What never changed was the working method classically trained ears, Debussy Ravel applied to soul structures, Ray Charles Church, a blend that let bass lines lope while chords glowed like streetlights after rain. The struggle at the end was stark and short. Diagnosed with cancer in December 2024, Jasper died on February 23, 2025 at 73. Family notices and major outlets confirmed the timeline. The coverage avoided melodrama because his own career had modeled a quieter kind of excellence. What was public was enough, the diagnosis, the date, and a community of musicians and fans describing how his parts, often invisible to casual listeners, held records together. In a business that often confuses volume with value, Jasper's final decade reaffirmed his oldest lesson: build the pocket, tell the truth in harmony, and let the song do the shining. The public timeline of Chris Jasper's passing is clear and simple. In December 2024, his family shared that he had been diagnosed with cancer. On February 23, 2025, just 2 months later, obituaries confirmed he had died at 73. The notices kept the tone he modeled throughout his career, factual, warm, and free of spectacle. They emphasized the arc rather than the drama, conservatory training, the Isley 3+3, breakthrough the songwriting and arranging that made grooves feel weightless, the later seasons of independent releases on Gold City Records. What was not made public are the intimate particulars, where he spent his last hours, who was at the bedside, what words were said. The reporting stayed within respectful lines, diagnosis, date, age, and let the music do the heavy lifting. Fans did the rest. Social feeds filled with the moments people carried with them, the suspended chords of "For the Love of You," the silk and steel sway of "Between the Sheets," the communal lift of "Caravan of Love." In that sense, the last moments we can speak about with certainty are not a scene, but a sound. A road's glow under a gentle backbeat harmony stacked just so, and the pocket holding steady for someone else's voice to rise. The private details belong to his family. The echo still playing in rooms everywhere belongs to all of us. Chris Jasper's legacy lives in the spaces most listeners don't name, but always feel: the voicings that warm a room, the chord cushions that make a singer sound inevitable. With the Isleys, he helped define a vocabulary of modern R&B in which the keyboard isn't decoration, but architecture. Roads glow under a patient backbeat synth, lines braided with guitar harmony stacked like stained glass. The result was intimacy at scale, quiet storm tenderness that could still fill an arena. In the studio, Jasper wrote with a classical ear and a church heart. On record, that meant grooves that breathed and bridges that lifted without strain. The influence outlasts any chart run. Bands still learn those changes because they sing back under the fingers. Producers still reach for that palette when a track needs warmth without weight. Much of his fame was uncredited on-stage arranger Glue, the quiet author of a feeling. But in the long view, that's a kind of immortality. You may not always see the architect. You live inside what he built. So, the farewell that fits is simple: keep the pocket steady. Let the harmony tell the truth, and leave enough air for someone else's voice to rise. If you hear a road's shimmer after rain and a melody settling perfectly into place, that's him still making room for beauty. We visited 5 rooms in the same house of culture, Armani's quiet authority. Spiegel's daring grin, Rolling Ray's one-syllable courage, Seals's workman hymns, and Jasper's architecture of warmth. Different crafts, one instruction makes space for people to stand, feel, and be seen. If one suit, one shot, one word, one chorus, or one chord lit something in, you pass it on, wear it, rewatch it, repeat it, replay it. That is how echoes become inheritance. Tell us your memory. Below the film scene, you still quote the song that carried you the look you tried on once and never forgot. If this tribute resonated, please like, subscribe, and share so these stories can keep finding the listeners who need them.